Math 7, whoop whoop. Let's get started with lesson 4-6. We're going to multiply some fractions. So this key concept, this is a great key concept for us because it explains it in words and symbols and in examples. So in words, to multiply fractions, or when we multiply fractions, all you're going to do is multiply the numerators and then also multiply the denominators. But the last step that you have to do is always to simplify our fraction. So even if the directions don't say to, make sure that you always do that. So with our symbols, a over b times c over d. So our final answer there would be A times C, or AC over BD. And then also in the example down below, I have 3/4 times 1/2. When I multiply that straight across, I end up just with 3/8. So let's go ahead and look at an example. I'm going to show you this example two different ways. So the first way, I'm going to follow exactly what that key concept said up above. I'm just going to take this fraction times this fraction. But you can see that this first fraction that I circled in black, that's like a negative fraction. Whether that negative be out front of the fraction, up in the numerator, or down in the denominator, that fraction is very negative. So that first fraction is negative, that second fraction is also negative, so I can use my integer rules also with fractions. So for multiplying and dividing fractions, I'm just going to, with my finger, I would cover up that negative, because I know that 2/7 is also negative, so therefore my final answer is going to be positive. So I'm actually going to drop my negatives, because I think sometimes seeing those negatives, you think a subtraction sign, but that's not subtraction, it's just saying that that fraction is negative. So once I rewrite my two fractions, all I'm going to do up here is just multiply straight across. So in my numerator, it's just like 1 times 2, so I get 2. And then in my denominator, 12 times 7 is 84. But then, like I said up above, when I put that big fat star, I said you have to always simplify. So I know what factor goes into both 2 and 84. I know that that number is 2. So when I divide both the top and the bottom, or the numerator and denominator, by 2, I end up with the answer of 1/42, and you box in your answer always. Then I look back and make sure, okay, well, I had a negative fraction times a negative fraction, so even if those were integers, a negative number times a negative number gives us a positive answer. We are good to go. But I'm also down here going to show you what happens if we simplify first. So this is actually called cross-simplifying. So basically, I look at kind of the opposite numbers. So the numerator from that first fraction, the denominator from the second fraction. You ask yourselves, is there a factor that goes into both of those that I can simplify? And the answer for those green ones are no. But then for 12 and 2, is there a number that goes into both 12 and 2 that I can divide? And the answer is yes. So right here, I know that 2 goes into both of these, so I can actually divide by 2 first. And so all we do there, you don't necessarily have to show that dividing by 2. I just wanted you, obviously, for the purpose of notes, but really you can just say, okay, 2 divided by 2, this, my new number is 1, and then 12 divided by 2, my new number is 6. So really it's like I have the fractions 1/6 times 1/7. And so now you can multiply straight across. 1 times 1 is 1, and then 6 times 7 is 42. So final answer gives us the same answer, but we're just dealing with some smaller numbers first. Now, do you have to cross simplify? No. I always have those students that they're like, nope, don't want to cross simplify, I just want to multiply straight across. The issue with that is that sometimes you do get some very, very large numbers on number 1, or whenever you don't cross simplify. So kind of keep that in mind. All right, so go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to try this first example. Pause. Alrighty, so take a look. I've shown it both ways. Again, I went ahead and did 5/12 times 6/10, multiplied straight across. I got 30 out of 120. And then I knew that 30 went into both 30 and 120. So I went ahead and divided both sides, or both the numerator and the denominator, by 30. But if you don't see that right off the bat, if you notice that both the top and the bottom are even, you can just start by dividing by 2. So dividing both the top and the bottom by 2, and then just continue down, but make sure that you always go into simplest form. And then down below, I've also shown using that cross simplification. So between 5 and 10, kind of that top left and the bottom right, I know that 5 goes into both. So when I divide by 5, I get 1. When I divide 10 by 5, I get 2. Same thing with 6 and 12. So I just ended up with smaller fractions from the get-go. And then I multiplied straight across to also end up with 1/4. Also notice that I did not lose my negative here. Okay, I showed that triangle up at the top. I started there. If you would like to do that at the end, either way is fine, but just keep those integer rules in mind. They will never go away. All right, looking at example 2. Now on to example 2. These are actually two mixed numbers. So using our mixed number information that we have seen in the past. We're going to go ahead and just, I might call it a little bit different than what you did, but it's called the check mark method. So for the check marks, you're going to multiply that whole number with the denominator. So I'm going to put a little times right there. So 3 times 2, and then I'm going to plus that 1. So notice that I kind of just attached it on to that fraction bar. So I'm going to add the 1. So 3 times 2, which is 6, plus 1 is 7. So I now have 7 over 2 times, and this whole fraction, I have to check mark this one as well. So when I check mark here, this fraction's still negative, but I'm going to take 2 times 4. I get 8 plus 3. 8 plus 3 gives us 11 fourths. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot multiply mixed numbers. You have to turn them into improper fractions. Otherwise, you're going to get the incorrect answer. All right, now that we are here, I see that this first fraction is positive, the second fraction is negative. So again, back to my triangle, I get rid of a negative, I get rid of a positive. My final answer is definitely going to be negative. So I kind of keep that in mind. I'll come back to that. For this one, you can either multiply straight across or cross simplify, but I can see that 7 and 4, there are no factors that go into both 7 and 4, and same thing with 2 and 11. There are no factors that I can simplify this one any longer, so I know that my only choice is to multiply straight across. So when I multiply that straight across, 7 times 11, we get 77. And then in the denominator, 2 times 4, I get 8. So my final answer here is 77 over 8, and then I remember to put my negative out front. You can keep this as an improper fraction, but we can also turn this back into a mixed number, and it is totally your choice. Just make sure whatever you choose to do, that your final answer is in simplest form. So I'm going to show us super quickly how to turn that improper fraction into a mixed number. That numerator goes under that divisor, so then 77, how many times does 8 go into 77? I know it can't be 10 times because that would be 80. So I know it needs to be 9 times. So 9 times 8 gives us 72 with a remainder of 5. So writing this mixed number, you could also write the 9 as the whole number. And then I have a remainder of 5, so it'd be 5/8, but then our final answer again has to be negative. So answer, you can keep it as an improper fraction or also turn it into a mixed number. All right, let's go ahead and I want you to try this next problem. Remember, check mark both numbers, figure out what your final answer is, make sure that final answer is in simplest form. All right, good luck. All right, take a look at my final answer on this one. I showed both again. You only need to show one, whichever one feels more comfortable, but I figured most of us would choose that top one. 12 fifths times 9 over 2, just multiply straight across, you get 54 fifths. And remember, you can leave this as an improper fraction, or you can turn it into a mixed number. It's completely your choice, but you do need to know how to turn an improper fraction into a mixed number. All right, let's look at the next problem. Alrighty, so for example 3, there's really nothing different except for the fact that you need to plug in x and y. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in for x and y. X is 3/8 times y, which is negative 2 2/9. And then this is one more practice for us. So go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to get an answer for number 3. Go ahead and pause. Alrighty, so my final answer I got was negative 5/6. If you did not get that answer, you need to pause the video and you need to fix your work so that your work matches up with mine. Alright, let's get this next one going, and then I'll have you continue simplifying. So that you try, it's negative 5x, which means negative 5 times x. So negative 5 times, and then x, I know, is 3/8. So when I multiply a 3/8, I see that I have like a integer or like a whole number, that number 5, and then 3/8. So in order to make that negative 5 into a fraction, I'm going to put negative 5/1. So now notice, poof, I have 2 fractions. So go ahead and pause the video and get your final answer. All right, hopefully you got negative 15/8 or negative 1 7/8. Once you turn your improper fraction into a mixed number, you can always turn it back into a mixed number by doing that check mark method just to make sure that you have the correct answer, because don't miss silly questions. If you're trying to convert it into a mixed number, then your mixed number is incorrect. Unfortunately, you are going to be counted wrong. All right, let's turn over our notes and let's finish them up. All right, word problems. The weight of an object on Mars is about 2/5 of its weight on Earth. So how much would an 80.5-pound dog weigh on Mars? So this is saying 2/5. We know that that's probably pretty important. And notice that I said 2/5 of its weight on Mars or on Earth. So therefore, if this dog weighs 80 pounds, the word of represents multiplication. So whenever you see of, I want you to think to multiply. So I'm going to take 2/5 times 80 and 1/2. And we know that we need to check mark this one. So I really have 2/5 times 161 over 2. We can do one of two things, multiply straight across or cross simplify. Here, because that number 161 is so large, I'm going to go ahead and cross simplify because I know 2 and 2 can obviously be divided by the same number. So then I just have 1 times 161 over 5 times 1. So I know that's 161 over 5, and that's as our improper fraction. But that seems a little silly to say, my dog on Mars would weigh 161 pounds. So we're going to definitely need to, for these word problems, convert them back into a mixed number. So 5 I know goes into 16 3 times. 15 with a remainder of 1. Bring down this one. How many times does 5 go in 11? The answer is twice. So 10 with a remainder of 1, which means my final answer is 32. And with my remainder, this is my numerator, so in 1/5 pounds. And I know all of this has to be positive because the dog can't weigh negative pounds. So your sentence should say something like, the dog on Mars would weigh 32 and 1/5 pounds. All right, let's look at the next example. So Austin's mom, he makes him spend 1/3 of each day in bed, but he typically spends he only sleeps for 3/4 of that time. So again, we see that word of. So with our two fractions, we're going to multiply these two things together. So 1/3 times 3/4, because they want him to spend 1/3 of the time, but really he only just spends 3/4 of that. So when I multiply those two things together, again, you can just multiply straight across, or you can choose to cross simplify. I'm going to show the cross simplification down here. So then I multiply straight across. I would end up with 3/12, which simplifies down. What factor goes into both 3 and 12? Hopefully we know it's 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then same thing down below, we can see 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 4 is 4. So my final answer is 1/4. So it says, what portion of each day does he spend sleeping? Well, Austin spends 1/4 of the day actually sleeping. So what portion of the day does he spend sleeping? It's 1/4. But the question also in parentheses, it says, is he well rested? If you think about 1/4 of the day, so 1/4 of the day, which is 24 hours. Again, just like we did on the You Try on the back page, I know that in order to make 24 into a fraction, you put 24 over 1. So if I multiply this straight across, it would end up with 24/4. And we know what 24 divided by 4 is. Our final answer would be 6. So dude only sleeps for 6 hours out of each day. Is he well rested? Depends on the human and what you think. Personally, no. I need me some 8 hours of sleep for sure. All right, and this You Try problem about Mr. Sharp, I want you to go ahead and pause and see if you can figure out what fraction of pizza he ate on Friday. Pause. Alrighty, so hopefully we ended up with 3/16. Also, I have not done that listening clue for this note. So please, because pizza, duh, I want you to draw me a slice of pizza somewhere. Make sure that you do have that slice of pizza somewhere big so that your teacher can see it. And then one last thing before we check out of notes, in the summary, we're going to write directions to help an absent student know how to multiply these two things. Well, the first thing that I would need to do is turn that 7 into a fraction. So go ahead and I want you to list out how to turn that 7 into a fraction and also how you would answer this question. The next time we are in class, we will discuss this summary question. So hopefully you understand these notes. If not, go back, rewatch. That's the beauty of video notes. All right, peace out.